So let me introduce you to Lyle. He has been an absolute pleasure and joy to have here. Very humble, very affable, certainly not a wise man from elsewhere, just somebody willing to share their journey. He's a trained architect and the principal urban designer at the City of Seattle. His work includes developing urban design frameworks for neighbourhood town centres on the light rail route, as well as revising city policies and regulations that align with the updated plans. His work requires reaching consensus amongst a diverse group of stakeholders, as well as interdepartmental and interagency collaborations with organisations such as King County Metro and Sound Transit. Now that all might sound, like a big heavy workload, but I think one of the things that Lyle and I both agree in, he actually doesn't have a mandate, so he must work cooperatively with government and with stakeholders to get an outcome, and the outcomes I've seen on the ground are very admirable. Additional to those responsibilities, he also does detailed transportation analysis and propose specific improvements to the system. He serves on the Transit Master Plan and Bicycle Master Plan Interagency Technical Advisory Team. Please make Lyle welcome.
Can you hear me adequately in the back? It's great to see such a well-dressed group of people. Seattle has become hopelessly casual. Dame Edna was in town recently, and she looked out over the Seattle audience and she said, "Don't you people own clothes?" In my experience, there is nothing more tedious than the out-of-town expert who arrives straight from the airport knowing no more about your town than what he or she has just read in an in-flight magazine, and then tells you everything you're doing is wrong and goes back to the airport. So, by contrast today, rather than being so presumptuous as to tell you what I think you should do, I'm simply going to share our light rail experience, what we got right, and perhaps more useful to you all, what we got wrong. But first, a little background. Now I probably need a clicker here. Let's see if this works. So, lessons from Seattle. We're located in the northwest corner, our state of Washington, northwest corner of the United States. The Canadian province of British Columbia is just to our north, and the state of Oregon is just to our south. The state of Washington itself, about 7 million people. It's bisected down the middle by a mountain range, the Cascade Range. The majority of the population lives on the west side. The east side is desolate and used for growing wheat. This is Seattle, a narrow isthmus, as you can see, located between saltwater Puget Sound to the west and freshwater Lake Washington to the east. The population of Seattle is about 720,000 people. And you can see by this image that there's kind of green bits in the middle, but a lot of sprawl going both to the north and the south. Handsome city, but you can see it's also a nightmare for transit construction. We've needed to build many, many bridges, lots of tunnels, and light rail construction was expensive as a result of it. You're lucky to have such a flat city. The city itself was founded by Europeans in the 1850s and then was incorporated as a city proper in 1869. Our early industries were all extraction. We fished all the fish and we cut down all the forests, and then we decided to move toward manufacturing. This image shows one of Bill Boeing's very first aircraft. He had a manufacturing site right in the heart of Seattle. Oh, wait, this doesn't. These show miners. I'm getting ahead of myself. You're wondering, what is he talking about? No, we had a big gold boom in the 1880s, and Seattle really profited. We, not from the gold particularly, but we supplied the miners on the way to the Klondike. As we say, the miners mine the gold, and we mine the miners. So a large population boom, large wealth boom, and then the railroad arrived. We're the western terminus of a transcontinental railroad, so a major port and a western terminus. Here we go. This is one of Bill Boeing's first airplanes constructed right in the heart of Seattle. Between the wars, between First and Second World War, the city grew rapidly. Relatively low-density, single-family detached, cute as buttons, bungalows that now are fabulously expensive. Most of our housing stock is, in fact, low-density, single-family. To be honest, Seattle did very well by World War II. We made a lot of money constructing aircraft for the war. This is an image of Bill Boeing's plant, 1944. And post-war, Seattle has continued to boom. We've become the Northwest Financial Center. We've shifted from aeronautics in addition to software. We're now the home for Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, just a wide range of businesses. As you can see, we're also a major port, and we are, in fact, the closest major U.S. port to Asia. So that has really changed our relationship globally. But at the same time, post-war, we've seen terrible sprawl. Again, very low density, haphazard sprawl, really in all directions. And, of course, the resulting traffic from that sprawl. So, Seattle experienced significant suburban sprawl during the 20th century, an economy that is moving from extraction and shipping to manufacturing and high technology, that increasingly benefits from its proximity to Asia, a city of considerable natural beauty, previously considered hopelessly remote, but recently discovered by the Eastern elite and declared chic by the New York Times. Stop me when this sounds familiar. So, Seattle and Perth, we share, well, it's a double-edged sword. We're beautiful cities, we're popular cities, we're growing fast, but then we have the responsibility to manage that growth. And we're really all needing to answer this question, which is how do we accommodate future growth and improve the environment while enhancing quality of life? That is the challenge that we're facing, and is also the challenge you're facing. We believe that smart transportation and smart land use decisions are a huge part of that puzzle, and that light rail is a big part of that transportation solution. This is an image of a transportation and open space plan from the turn of the last century. Very sophisticated, very progressive plan. The red lines would be a rapid transit system. It was put to popular vote, and we approved the Parks and Boulevard system, which is wonderful today, but we voted down the rapid transit system. Tried again in 1926. We ran straight into the Great Depression and went nowhere. Seattle's had a weird thing for monorails, and going back to 1920, we proposed a monorail system. Curiously, we built an actual about a kilometer section of monorail for the 1961 World's Fair that was supposed to become a big system that didn't, and then we revisited it one more time in the 1990s. This plan got further than it should until we realized that it was hopelessly expensive and really very unrealistic, and was stopped. So back to reality here. 1968, we proposed a very thoughtful regional mass transit scheme for the city. It was voted down in '69, and then again in 1970. Finally, in 1995, we approved this first starter light rail line from the center of the city to the airport. Winston Churchill quipped that Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing right after we've exhausted all the other possibilities. And so, having exhausted all the other possibilities, we constructed this light rail line that opened in 2008. Looks like that. And was so popular, and this may be a lesson for you all, that we immediately approved a nearly 100-kilometer system, which is now under construction, planning and construction right now. Okay, some lessons from Seattle. Successful light rail requires smart land use. we've so often focused on the rail portion, and it's complicated, and the engineering is difficult, and the funding is all crazy. But you can't forget the land use, because in order to work well, you've got to have the land use that supports good rail. And the beauty of light rail is you don't need a lot of increased density or intensity around your stations, as you might say with the heavy rail system, but you still need to get some. A huge component of our smart land use decisions happened in 1996 when we established a growth management boundary. You can see the red line that contains and defines the areas of the county where we wanted to see, expected to see growth, leaving the forests and agricultural and open spaces alone. This is really an important part of the conversation, because if you don't stop the sprawl, it's very hard to move forward. Here's the City of Seattle zoning map, and you can see most of it is yellow bits. We're about 2/3 zoned single-family detached dwelling. That means we've got to channel all of the growth, the expected growth, which is about 120,000 new residents in the next 20 years, into the bits that aren't yellow or aren't blue, because the blue bits are the industrial area. So you can see we've got a real challenge in terms of how we accommodate new growth. Our solution was to adopt what we call the urban village plan or policy. The red areas are our urban centers, where the expectation for most of the job growth and most of the residential growth will occur. The orange areas are lesser, more suburban areas, and yet areas that can accommodate a moderate amount of job growth and a moderate amount of residential growth. And then we just left the rest alone. We said this is where the growth is going to occur. And the bargain was if you're willing to be an urban village, if you're willing to take on extra density and intensity, we will provide you with benefits. We'll provide you with new libraries, community centers, parks. Now, this was a total bluff. This was a complete bluff, because we didn't actually have the money to provide those things. But fortunately, we just happened to pass a couple of referendum, a new library referendum and a new parks referendum. So we were actually able to deliver on that promise. But we located all of those new facilities within the urban villages and urban centers. Again, that was part of the bargain. And we aligned our light rail system to hit all of those urban centers and urban villages. So you can see it's a little bit of a circuitous route, because it had to hit all of those villages, but it really aligns the transportation and land use in a thoughtful way. Okay, lesson 2, steal shamelessly. All of us around the country, and in fact around the world, globally we're trying to solve this challenge of how do we maximize our transportation and land use opportunities. And we're doing it in Seattle, Vancouver's doing it, Portland's doing it. It's all over the world. And borrowing from what works in other places is very effective. And I must give credit to Perth. Your study tours, my appearance here this afternoon, really speaks volumes of your interest in looking at how other people are doing it. And remember, if you improve something slightly, it's not plagiarism, it's innovation. Lesson 3, this is a big one. Light rail is a pedestrian system. All riders begin their trip and end their trip as pedestrians, and providing for pedestrian comfort is really hard. To make a vehicle system work, it's easy. All you need is a relatively flat and relatively straight road. Providing for pedestrians, much more challenging. Pedestrians get hot, they get cold, they get wet, they get bored, and they can only go for about 15 minutes, maybe 20 max in terms of walking. That really begins to define the shape and size of your villages, and you can't really do much more than that. So really be attentive to that condition. This is an image some of you have seen before, but it really neatly summarizes how we built our communities after 1940 and before 1940. Indeed, the way we'd been building communities for 10,000 years had a stark departure after World War II, where we began to do massive segregations of land uses, large areas of residential, bedroom communities without services, large areas of multifamily just packed in without amenity, and large shopping malls that are only accessible by vehicle. 30% of Americans live where their not in walking distance to anything. They can walk to nothing. They must drive. And then you fall into the paradigm of having to burn a liter of petrol to buy a liter of milk. And the other problem with this post-war community is it really isolates the third of the population that cannot drive. Those who are too young, too old, or just don't want to drive are virtually house arrest in their neighborhood. And of course, the biggest problem with the post-war 1940 development is it's very hard to serve with light rail. Pre-1940, you know exactly where to put the light rail stop. It's right there on Main Street by the shops. Post-war, well, maybe at the mall, maybe at the school. I mean, there's no nexus. It's not walkable. It is the challenge, and it's the challenge Seattle has, and it's certainly the challenge Perth has, because both of us have built a lot of post-war 1940 development. Here's something else that's really interesting when it comes to walkability. The image on the left shows how walkable our neighborhoods are. The deeper brown, the more walkable. The brighter yellow, the less walkable. Then simultaneously to the right is an image showing carbon production, CO2 production. And they align almost perfectly. The more walkable your neighborhood is, the less likely it is that you're producing CO2. That's really an important consideration from an environmental standpoint. And of course, the other consideration is that walkable neighborhoods are inherently healthier. If you live in a walkable neighborhood where you're walking to transit, 20 minutes a day, walking occasionally to get goods or to the library, you're getting that 30 minutes of exercise that all of our doctors are going on and on about all the time that we have a hard time getting naturally. So walkable neighborhoods have a natural health benefit. And I've got to say, this has come to the attention of the Centers for Disease Control, which is our overarching health organization back in the States. Suddenly, they're in the urban design game, which is great, because when Lyle Bicknell flaps his lips, nobody listens. But when someone in a white coat starts talking, people really pay attention. So this nexus between urban design and health really is important. Here is a heat map, if you will, for the walkability of Seattle, and you can see our kind of close-in neighborhoods are the greenest. We have a few satellite walkable neighborhoods outside the center city. Here's an image for Perth. You can actually go online, walkscore.com. You can check out Perth. It's a glass half full, glass half empty situation here. Room for improvement. But what I think is so telling is that you've got some very walkable neighborhoods and some neighborhoods not so much. And our experience is that you put your emphasis, you put your attention in those areas that are walkable, because you'll probably never be able to serve well areas that have high auto use. Here's a fascinating image. This is Los Angeles. For those of you who've been to Los Angeles, you've seen it before. Wide street, banal architecture, horribly unwalkable. By contrast, here's a great place, almost Mediterranean, very inviting, very walkable. Well, here's the thing of it. They're the same place. The only difference is the curb-to-curb distance has been reduced through the magic of Photoshop. This is a really telling lesson, and it's a hard one, and it's one that we didn't necessarily get right, but I encourage you to think about. As your roads get wider, which is the temptation, of course, whenever you're trying to build a light rail system, your pedestrian experience gets worse. And just be very mindful of that as you're trying to fit all the things you need to fit in your right-of-way. I'm not saying this is easy, but at a certain point when your road gets too wide, you might as well give up, because it'll never be a pedestrian experience and it'll never be a very good light rail experience. Lesson 4, be prepared to talk about parking and parking and endless discussion of parking. We spend most of our time talking about parking, but it's because it's complicated. Parking is a natural part of the automobile system. It's the one most of us rely on, and when you change it, it's a big deal. So doing it thoughtfully, and we came up with a lot of strategies in terms of how we had the conversation, where we thought it was appropriate to provide parking. For example, we did not provide parking at our light rail stations. We did not provide park and rides. Even though you'll have that whole discussion about why you should have it, we felt it made much more sense to provide a vital, walkable neighborhood next to our light rail stations than a sea of asphalt. So that was our lesson. You may have to have that conversation But just be prepared to have the conversation. Lesson 5, something we did not get well, something you actually get very well here in Perth. Connect seamlessly. Systems work only as well as they connect to one another. Connect your light rail to transit seamlessly so you can get off light rail and get on a bus without an awkward connection. Again, you guys do a very good job. We didn't. Here is a kind of classic example. Our light rail to the airport almost is within walking distance of the airport. There's the station, and then you've got to walk for about 10, 15 minutes to the airport itself. Unlike if you take a cab, the cab will drop you off right in front. Can you imagine if the cab kind of dropped you off 15 minutes away and said good luck? Yeah, so be attentive to this. It's hard. It takes a lot of design expertise. It often takes a lot of cost. But again, the system is only as good as its connections. We also have some really innovative new things that are on the horizon. This is our streetcar system, which runs just in traffic. But next to it is a car-to-go. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's a car share system where you can just find one on the street, touch it with your smartphone, drive it anywhere you want, and leave it. It's a really great thing to link up with light rail. And for the city of Seattle, we've allowed these actually to park free anywhere. If you've got a smart car, you can just park free, just leave it anywhere on the street. So it's really a great supplement to our transportation system. We also have zip car parking. This is a more traditional car rental. You rent it over the internet, you pick it up at the station, and then you return it back to the station. Another important element, don't forget about buses. They're not sexy, but they carry, at least in our case, the vast majority of transit users. And plugging buses effectively into light rail is a really important nexus. Lesson 6, light rail is not a silver bullet. Don't overpromise when it comes to light rail. Light rail will probably not reduce congestion and should not be sold that way. It may slow down the increase of congestion, but it probably won't reduce congestion. Likewise, it doesn't always spur economic development. It can be a great economic development tool, and we've seen cases, certainly in Seattle, where even before light rail arrives, things are booming, but we've also seen cases, especially in socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods, where light rail, even though we've set the table and have done a beautiful job in terms of urban design, the density just hasn't happened yet. Lesson 7 is to avoid false dichotomies. A lot of people say, well, I'll never use light rail. I've got to drive. Well, guess what? You don't have to change. If you love what you got, that's great. We're not talking to you. We're talking to these folks. This is an interesting image from Seattle, and it may be applicable to Australia. Generation X and Generation Y are not about cars. They really, at least in our experience, are looking for vital, walkable neighborhoods where maybe they'll own a car, but they won't use it for a lot of their trips. And in fact, many of them are even willing to live without a car. That may be your demographic for growth. And if you've got auto-oriented neighborhoods, just let them be. Really focus on this new demographic. Lesson 8, final lesson, don't start the conversation with the word density, because this is what people think of when they think of density. And if you can't get out ahead of that conversation, you're going to lose. So what we like to do is start with the image, start with the vision. This is Vancouver, our sister city, our pretty sister city to the north. That's density, incredible residential density. But not only is it beautiful from the outside, it's gorgeous on the inside. This is one of the densest neighborhoods on the West Coast. If you visit, the amazing thing about it is it's quiet. It is absolutely quiet. It's green. It's very civilized. Lead with these images, not zoning changes or density discussions. Likewise, this is the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon, our sister city to the south. A different kind of density, but still very dense. They achieve most of it in the 7, 8, 9-story range. Beautiful parks, great transit, really attractive. These are the images that you want to work and inspire people with. Other lesson is light rail doesn't need a huge amount of density. These are actually the kind of densities that we've seen in Seattle around some of our stations. The image in the lower left is Somerville, Massachusetts. These are 3-story walk-ups, and they have a lot of them, and it's one of the densest cities in the United States, achieved just through that typology. Of course, the other way to get density that everybody likes is to take malls, especially dead malls or dying malls, and make them much more than they are. Introduce residential, build out to the edges. This is a place with just one gesture you can easily serve with light rail. Now, I just wanted to quickly do a couple of case studies to show that there are many different ways, many different solutions in this discussion. I'm going to contrast Vancouver again to our north. We share the Salish Sea, the Sound and Blue area. Their Gulf Islands are Puget Sound. This is a ceremonial arch at the border between Washington State and British Columbia. I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Children of a common mother." The mother here is Mother England. And I always wince at this a little bit because there's the good child, Canada, neat, tidy, obedient, and the bad child, United States, loud, disobedient, rebellious, kicks mom in the shins and leaves home early. So that continuity of character has continued. Vancouver really is a much more civil and sophisticated city than Seattle to the south. At the same time, it's great to have them there. We really learn from the kinds of lessons from what they're doing. They went into a slightly different path, and we can talk about that. Oh, here it is, Vancouver, beautiful, beautiful city. I encourage you to go if you can. But it was not this way 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was a bland, boring, nothing town. All of this has happened really quite recently, and they've just done a beautiful job building high-density, livable city, and I'd look toward Vancouver for tips on how to do that well. We have two things in common, interestingly enough. The other thing is we share an active volcano. In our case, Mount Rainier, which is due to erupt any time. In their case, Mount Baker. It really adds a certain spice, I think, to your life. Okay, just to contrast their systems, they have the SkyTrain, opened up in 1986. We have our Sound Transit Light Rail, opened up in 2008. Theirs is a completely automated system, so it's different from light rail in that way. You can see the carriage sizes are about the same, but their system is entirely grade separated, mostly elevated. Ours, you can see there, the elevated system, ours runs within kind of the street right-of-way. I just wanted to compare two projects just to show that there are different ways of doing this. This is Rainier Vista, Seattle, aerial. This is how it looked in the 60s. It was old Boeing World War II worker housing that was then turned into social housing. Tight little boxes that had really seen better days, huge crime problems. We rebuilt the whole thing in its entirety. Tripled the density, but this is really important. We kept the social component, the social housing component, but we integrated it with market rate housing. In other words, housing sold just at the market cost. And again, not a high density. You can see here along the avenue, 4 stories, and then behind, 3, and then going down to a relatively low density that integrated very well into the adjacent neighborhoods. So, by contrast, this is Collingwood's Village in Vancouver. You can see it's a similar distance from their central core. They went in a very different direction. You can see here around their SkyTrain, 30, 40-story towers. But look at what that gives you in terms of open space. Huge parks, a really transformative new town, if you will. Vancouver does a really good job at sizing their development right to meet the street. This is something we've embraced too. It's the 10-meter rule, that you pay a huge amount of attention to the first 10 meters up and the first 10 meters out. That is the pedestrian realm. That's where you want to pay attention. The buildings meet the ground very elegantly, thoughtful integration of amenity. And this is another thing that Vancouver just does so well, and we should all copy. They do this row house design, this row house typology, so you'll have this great residential, ground-related dwellings, and then behind it you'll have high-rises. So you don't even know that the high-rises are there because the street is so well done. And they really do this exquisitely. So just to conclude, back in Seattle, Amazon Corporation is getting huge, taking over the world. They had the choice to move out to the suburbs as they expanded. That would have been the logical choice. But they discovered their employees. This was not just a business generosity decision. Their employees wanted to live where they could walk, where they could meet many of their needs without a car. And so Amazon has made the choice to expand within our center city. Those 3 towers now are under construction simultaneously, and I just heard as I left town that they're going to break ground on one more tower to the west, which will bring their total to something like 4.1 million square feet. It's just a huge a bit of growth for the city, and of course that has spurred all kinds of ricochet growth as well, and has resulted in this, which is really a testament, I think, to our success. Is light rail entirely responsible for this? It's hard to say, but it seems like we're doing something right in the fact that our city, our center city, is now growing faster than our suburbs, significantly faster than our suburbs. And as I left town, the number of cranes in this area has in fact doubled from what you see here. So that is the Seattle story. Thank you.
That's fantastic.